Hey guys, it's Mark from The Abstract here. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about dominant seventh chords and their functions. Before we talk about that, let's discuss what is a dominant seventh chord. The way to do that, I'm going to start building chords in the key of A major. And the way to build chords in the key of A major is to build chord stacks off of every root note in the scale. So I'm going to go ahead and mute these two tracks underneath the first track. We'll come back to those tracks. But as you can see, I started building an A major scale. I'm going to mute these real quick, Control M. And all the roots that you see here are an A major scale spelled out from A back up to A. Very familiar scale at this point, hopefully. But now I want to build chords off of each of those root notes. And the way I'm going to do this is to build chords using only notes that exist in the A major scale. I'm not going to pull from other notes outside of that scale. And there's a distinct reason for that, which we'll discuss in a few minutes. So if I were to only use notes inside of A major, and if we were to move by thirds, which is typically how you build chords, moving in thirds, this is what we would get. A third up from A is C sharp. So that gives us this note right here. That's the third of an A chord, of the A chord. And now we need to skip over another note to get the fifth. Skip that note. Boom. Here's our fifth. So we got A, C sharp, and E as the root third and the fifth of that chord. Now we need a seventh because we're going to build seventh chords. And the seventh turns out to be G sharp. And we put a G sharp right here. Unmute it. And this is the sound of our first chord. Slow down the tempo. So, it's a major 7 chord. And the way we determine it's a major 7th chord is simply by pulling notes from the existing scale that we're in. We just so happen to land on an A major 7th chord because it just so happened to line up that way. But are all the chords going to be a major 7th chords? Well, let's find out. If we were to do the same exact procedure for the second chord, skip over thirds and start building a chord. Here's our root, skip. This is our third, so we got B followed by D. And then the fifth of that would be F sharp, as determined already right here. And then the seventh would be A. If we isolated that chord, in comparison to this chord, one more time. They sound different. And that's because they are different. The first chord stack was an A major 7th, and this one is a B minor 7th because it has the minor third and the minor 7th. So we already know that there's two different types of chords. Now, if we were to continue this process by building chords off of every root note in the scale, we would eventually get this. I'll slow down the tempo a little bit more for you. Let's do 75. And here's what each chord will sound like if we were to play them one by one. So other than the fact that they all sound very nice, they're all different quality chords. And this is actually what should be resulting. different sounding chords. We should not have chords that sound like they're the same quality, because major scales have predetermined qualities built off of certain positions in the scale. The first position in an A major scale will always be a major seventh chord, because it will always contain a major third, a perfect fifth, and a major seventh, which equals a major seventh chord. The second position will always maintain a minor seventh chord. Same with the third, because each of these chords have a minor third, a perfect fifth, and a minor seventh, which is different from the first chord because it had a major third and a major seventh. So, using this process, we are already getting different type of chords, and having different type of chords will allow us to create better songs. We don't want to write songs with the same type of chord over and over again. That's not cool. That's not real music. You want to have different types of chords. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, there's a certain type of chord in this particular example that is different from all the other ones. And that is the chord built off of the fifth position in the scale. The fifth position in this scale is built off of the note E, which happens to be the fifth position of the scale. What type of chord do we have here? Well, we know that the first chord, I'll just tell you, was a major seventh, minor seventh, another minor seventh. This fourth chord will always be major seventh as well, because it's got the major third and the major seventh. We'll skip over the fifth position. This is another minor seventh chord, minor third, minor seventh. This is a different type of chord, which is pretty similar to the chord that we're going to discuss here. We'll get back to that. And this chord is another A major seventh chord. It duplicates the root, just an octave higher. But the fifth chord, it has a unique combination of intervals, which we haven't really discussed or broken down yet. It has a root. What type of third does it have? A major third, perfect fifth, but a minor seventh. Now, so far we've discussed major sevenths having both a major third and a major seventh. Minor seventh chords have a minor third and a minor seventh. But this type of chord has a combination of a major third and a minor seventh. That is what a dominant seventh chord is. And that's what makes it dominant. Now, don't think of the word dominant as in this dominates all the other chords. It's not that type. I couldn't really tell you why they called it the dominant. But what it does is by having this unique combination of a major third and a minor seventh, it allows you to treat that chord as a transitional element, because embedded within that chord is one of the most dissonant intervals in music. The combination between the third and the seventh. I'm going to go ahead and mute all this real quick. Control M. Control M. We'll isolate this chord right here real quick. And you can tell, before I even talk about the interval inside of it, that it has a weird sonic quality that more or less demands that we travel to another chord. If we compare it to an A major seventh chord, which is the first chord in this sequence, that seems like it's hit its home base. It doesn't necessarily need to travel anywhere. But this chord kind of has that quality that makes us think, okay, well, if we wanted to travel somewhere, we could, based off of the way it sounds. There's a sort of sonic pull to it. What creates that sonic pull? It's the interval between the third, and the seventh. I'm going to mute the root and the fifth real quick. And this is what the interval between the third, which is the major third, and the minor seventh sounds like. It's a very dissonant interval. It's the tritone. And the tritone is the most dissonant interval in music, or at least in Western music. It has one of those pull qualities. It makes us want to go somewhere. So in this example, in this track, let's go ahead and see what we can do about that sonic pull. So I've isolated. I'm going to go ahead and create an E major 7th chord again. For some reason, I had it built off of A. Just drag all of it up to E. We have E being the root. G sharp is the major 3rd. B is the perfect 5th. D is the minor 7th. So if we isolate the 3rd and the 7th, we have that dissonant tritone again. Now what can we do with that dissonant tritone? To make it less dissonant and sound like we are resolving our cadence. And a cadence is a pause in music where we feel like we've come to a sort of resolution from tension. When there's tension and release, that is a cadence. And a dominant 7th chord creates the tension. Now we want to release it to have a good cadence. What can we do? Well, a cool thing about a tritone is it's very easy to resolve, and there's a couple different ways to do it. A typical way to do it is to resolve inward. So to resolve inward, we would go up from the bottom note. So I'm going to hold Option and drag up a half step to the next measure. So this note resolves to this note, whereas this note would resolve down, thus resolving inward. Option, drag. So now we're going to have this sort of cadence between tension and release. Tritone. Sounds nice, and it's smooth. And that's typically how we want to handle a tritone. But that's not the only type of resolution that we want, or we could have. We could resolve outward from each other. So this would essentially resolve up, and this note would essentially resolve down, making it like this. You don't necessarily have to go inward both ways or outward both ways. One tone could go out, one tone could go in, and you can have something like this. So this tone resolved down, this one also resolved down. What do we have? Now, if we wanted to resolve to another tritone, we certainly could do that. That's music. You know, there's no right answer for anything. But we don't necessarily have to go up whole steps or half steps either from each direction. Well, let's say I wanted to move up a whole step here, and then maybe keep that note where it is, resolve down a half step from the top note, up a whole step from the bottom note, and this is another type of resolution. There's so many different possibilities here. Now, typically when we're dealing with a dominant chord in a major key or a minor key, but since we're talking about major, usually the dominant chord is treated as the 5 of a particular key. Why the 5? Because this is the root chord, the 1 chord, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you know anything about classical music or common rock music, pop music, there's 5-1 cadences everywhere. 5-1 means that you are on the 5 chord and you resolve to the 1 chord. And that's essentially what we're going to do in this case. We're going to resolve the E dominant chord, which I'm going to unmute all the tones, to an A major chord, which is the root of the key. So how do we do that? Well, first thing I would do is just get the bass notes in, just so we know where we're going, get the roots in. We have the root here for the 5 chord. Let's Option drag this down to A right here. So we'll have something like this. Oh, forgot to mute the second track. Those are going to be the roots of our chords. So we got those in there. Now I'm going to put this guy back. Now, without knowing a thing about, major or minor chords, or for those of you who are just kind of wrapping your heads around this for the first time, I hope at least you can hear that this chord is demanding some sort of release. That's pretty. That's typical. Doesn't have to be the only type of resolution, but it's typical. And in this example, we're dealing with typical. So what are the notes of the A major 7th chord? Let's refer. We have A. Oh, that would help if I unmuted the track. A, C sharp, which is the major 3rd, E, which is the perfect 5th, and G sharp, which is the major 7th. I got to make sure that all those notes are covered when I resolve. So the cool thing about voice leading is we could move in very small distances to resolve one chord to the next. What is this note right here? We have a D, and we need to get either a C sharp, an E, or a G sharp. Well, it just so happens that a very short distance from D is C sharp. We can go right down to C sharp, which is already muted. I'll unmute it. So essentially, this is going to be our bottom and top note of our new chord. It already sounds good, but it needs to be filled out with the 3rd and the 7th. Or excuse me, the 5th and the 7th. So what else do we have? Well, the E is already resolving down to the A, which is fine. We got the D to C sharp. We need the E. Now, something to pay attention to when we're dealing with voice leading. Are there any common tones from chord to chord? Common tones are the notes that are shared between chords. Are there any notes that are in one chord and also in the chord that we're resolving to? Just so happens that there are 2 notes that are in the chord that we're resolving to. The 5th, which is E, and the 7th, which is G sharp. So without even thinking about it, what we could do is just drag these to the next chord without moving them, because the best sort of voice leading is no movement. And essentially what we've done is resolve our chord. I'm going to go ahead and delete this muted tone right here. So we have now the root on the bottom, followed by the 5th, followed by the 7th, and then the 3rd on top. Now, even though it's not root, 3rd, 5th, 7th, it still maintains all the chord tones and is more spread out based on voice leading. It doesn't change the chord. We could have easily taken this 3rd and brought it down an octave, which is shift option down arrow, and it would still be the same chord. But the reason I chose to put it up where this note is because it would sound not as smooth without it. There's a gap in the resolution, but not anymore. If I were to put this up an octave, shift option up, now it's more spread out, and this note is resolving to this note, or this note is resolving to this note. This one is resolving to that, this one to that, and to this. So everybody is participating in the resolution now, and that's what we want. And it's going to sound cleaner, and there's not going to be as big of a gap in the resolution or a jump. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to resolve to an A major 7th chord. We were dealing with 7th chords in the previous example because I was showing you how to build 7th chords off of each of the root notes. But let's say you're ending your song and you don't want to have that 7th lingering on. You could make the G sharp, which is the 7th, an A. So there's no it's a strong A chord and there's no 7ths lingering on. It depends what you're trying to do. Whereas before it was either sound fine. It really depends on the style of the music you're producing and what you're trying to go for overall in your chords. Okay, a little bit dense for some of you, I know, but don't hesitate to reach out to me and ask me a bunch of questions. Stay tuned for the next lesson on more cadences.